working
on? I've just been like, it's sort of, I'm sort of doing it like within my own like songwriting where I just have like two different chords and I'm sort of just trying to like follow the melody, you know, from one chord to the next chord, trying to like move in between it through like a half step or something. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. So.
Could you play me an example?
Oh. No. I mean, like, probably not. Sorry, at right now. Sorry. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, look, it sounds a lot like a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, right? Like making melodies, using chord tones as guides. You know. So, what's a chord progression you've been trying to join? Like, what's you said two chords. What kind of two chords?
Well, I guess 1/5 or 1/4.
Okay. Yeah. Nice and simple to start with. Okay. So, in major, we're assuming.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. 1 to 5. Really basic melody might just be on chord tones. So we might have. So, like, starting with something like that is not a bad place to be. I always think your best place as a beginner is to start with a progression that you think already sounds a bit musical. So I think one problem with this is that it doesn't, to me at least, it doesn't inherently sound. I mean, it sounds musical, but it doesn't make me feel like anything's happening.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I get you.
Yeah. However, one I was taking a look at is going just 1/4 5 1/4 5. So you're like. And that's a lot easier. Like. Because something about that movement inside of the chords, I think creates a more natural idea of motion, especially when we're just talking about primary triad notes, right? I'm not even trying to add anything extra to it. I'm just trying to use mostly arpeggio notes. So maybe that'd be a cool place to start.
Yeah. Okay. Because like it's just it's trying to piece everything together, like with the obviously the arpeggios, the inversions. It's just piecing everything together, moving the like sort of like weaving certain shapes. I guess I don't know how to conceptualize it, but it's like certain like like the way the intervals like relate obviously to each chord. Just trying to make it all relate.
Yeah. No. You're at a kind of a pivotal point.
Yeah.
Understanding lies on the edge of this precipice if you're going to get the last little bit together. Okay, so to start with, C, F, and G, right?
Okay.
So let's start off by finding them all in the same place. So C would be.
Easy.
Yep. F.
Yeah.
kind of need to hear it.
Yeah.
All right. So you might start with like having the chords, and we're after cheesy melodies here, like nothing great. So like da 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 ba da ba da ba ba da ba ba da da ba da ba ba da ba 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 do ba ba da ba ba da ba da ba ba da ba. Okay. Okay. So some kind of feel, some kind of idea. If you can't already play that, you need to kind of experiment with something. So that was a cool melody, right? I mean, yeah, cool is an interesting thing to be describing this particular feel with, but like, you know what I mean? It sounded musical.
Yeah.
So how did I do it? I started on a C chord. Plain old C arpeggio, just with a bit of rhythm. Yeah. And I'm trying to do that, like I wouldn't even know how to explain it, that kind of like cheesy feel rhythm. Da, 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 da. Now I need to change to F. A good option for F at this point would be the F tone that I'm surrounding.
Yeah, right? Just so like go from like the fifth of the C from the G to the F or something.
Yeah, totally. If I do this, that is a kind of melody, but it sounds less joined.
Yeah, it's like a big like leap, so to speak. It's not as like tied together.
Yeah, and it's like that will be fine if I make that a thing, right? Like. Yeah. Right now, it's become a thing because I've repeated it, and that's one of the rules. Remember, we were talking about say it twice.
Yeah. Could you also say it's more like it also adds a greater sense of like harmonic change because you're sort of playing that lower bass note? I guess not in that instant, but like it.
Well, yes, but it's because of the distance between the two notes you play. Right? Yeah. It's a long leap. You know, coming up from that G all the way down to the F. That's a big distance. And big distances sound less joined than things that are close together. And I think to kind of start nutting out the idea of melody, we don't want to do that. Like if you look at hundreds of melodies. Oh, you frozen? You still there? Yeah. If you look at just like hundreds of melodies, they're always going to be notes that are close to one another. You'd be surprised how much melodies kind of use the same three notes and just cycle two others in.
Fair enough.
Yeah, how's the connection doing? You're doing okay?
So visual, like audio, I can hear everything fine. Some of the videos are a bit delayed, but I think because the audio is fine, I think we're all good.
Okay, cool. So we start here, and then we got some options. All right, the improvisation option here is we could go up or we could come down.
You know, so I like sorry, do you mind? Let's go down. So we go like the F, C, and then G. I mean A, I guess. F, C, G, A.
Yep. Okay. What's the melodic concept that says why that works?
Well, you're going down the fifth and then to the third.
Well, I was thinking of like general, like the concept of melody, right?
Okay.
We went up on the first one. We went down on the second one. That implies that probably on the third one we're going up again.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? Because there's these things that come in sequences, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's one way of ending it. But like something like the reason that it sounded melodic is we went la da 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 ba 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 back to the start, right?
Yeah.
And it makes this kind of intuitive sense about, that's what a melody is. And one of the things that's good to start with is to really think about it to yourself. Like, okay, I just did this and I did that. Why did that work? It's not call and response. I mean, it's kind of call and response because the call is going up and the response is coming down. You know, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between call and response and melodic mirroring or sequencing. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're kind of connecting it to some of these ideas of how a melody goes. It could have worked going up too. probably want to come down to finish it off. Right?
Gotcha.
Yeah? And when you're improvising, well, this is kind of like weird stop improvising where I do a phrase and then I think about my next phrase and I do the next phrase.
That's all right. Makes sense.
But it's very helpful to keep dwelling on these ideas. What makes it a melody? And melodies are they are very different to, say, connecting riffs or connecting the same pattern on every chord. You can have melodies which pretty much do the same pattern. You don't often hear singers sing that. That's kind of like an instrumental melody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think from an improvisational background or something that you want to push your own development, you can probably already do those. It's a very bass player thing to do, right? Like you just take the same pattern you apply to chords.
Yeah.
And you can probably already do that in your sleep. So the thing to aim for is nice melodic connection. So let me hear you have a couple of stabs, just doing 1, 4, and 5.
Okay.
If you need to, stop between it and we'll have a chat. Like, do a phrase, come up with something on the one chord, then we'll chat about how it goes on the next one.
All right, well, I guess I'll just start with going to...
Hold on. I lost the audio on the... Can you play it up an octave?
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Sweet.
All right. Do a different one.
Okay. Because those, yeah. All right. Well, I gotta get my timing and rhythm down. That was sort of not completely right, but...
That kind of okay, but what if we thought about all three of them coming up? So we get all right. So one of the things to do is after you've played around in one position, you'll find probably you'll get stuck in a loop. But if I think about directing my fingers somewhere else, like I've got actually, instead of, if I think about, okay, I want to cover more of the neck. I want to come up a bit. Right, like sometimes you can break yourself out of doing the same kind of thing over and over again by forcing yourself into something different. So all I was thinking about then is I got to keep trying to see these chords coming up the neck. And I remember when I first tried doing this to myself, I would have to stop at every chord change.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best thing to do.
Yeah, and I'd be playing C here. I'm like, okay, C here. Where's F? Here's F. Okay, there's F, and then I'd do something around here. So where this relates kind of to inversions and arpeggios, I would say think about it like this. Here's your C first inversion. Then we get F root inversion, and then up to G root inversion.
Oh yeah.
All right. Okay. Now all we're going to do is play those notes in some kind of rhythm.
Okay.
Let me hear it.
Well, you got the. It's not. Yeah.
totally exactly what you should be looking for. Like, you don't even have to pre-plan it so much as
Yeah.
okay, what's the note I'm hearing? Da de do boom da dum da de boom boom da dum da de boom boom da dum da de dum boom ba da da dum da. Right, I went back to the group. Right, that's all you're really listening for at the moment is the next note after you've done it. The more you can tie yourself into this idea of I'm resolving this line, right? This whatever you play, it's going to naturally point somewhere, and you've got to make sure that you go in that direction. The
Yeah,
things that sound
just in regards to that, I think something I've been told I got to work on as well is just like if in my ear I hear where I want something to go, is being able to translate that onto my instrument.
the
So maybe
more
I can use this exercise to like if I hear the sound I want to go to, like I just find that note and to like learn sort of.
yeah, and the more that you work on your triads, the more that's going to happen. I can tell you, like, I play guitar for quite a while now. It's like 27 years or something. Um, and like the thing that really pushed me over the edge, I into playing a lot more about what I hear, is triads. I had played pentatonics, I had played modes, I had played a lot of improvised music for years and years and years and years, and it would always be hit and miss. You know, it'd be these things where the nights when I was on, my solos fucking killed. They were
Hell yeah.
amazing. And then the nights when I was off, it's just like, wow, I can just hear that you're just recycling garbage from scales. And like part of it is nerves, part of it is pressure. You know, definitely the more comfortable I was, the easier it was to slide into this place. But what I eventually realized was the place I was sliding into is just listening to what I'm playing. And I needed some way of tying myself into connecting what I hear. And the problem I think with scales is there's just too many choices.
Yeah.
You know, with this stuff, like especially what we're doing right now, this really basic kind of silly music perspective is we're only really hearing triad notes. All right. Now, eventually, you could break that out a little bit. You know, like you might go ba 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 ba. Oh, I went across a different jazz chord change there. But like, you know, you can start directing extra things in there. Like for that opening. Right? I'm doing this kind of like, announce the dominant 7 to get to the 4 chord. And that is a really distinctive sound. Or like I might say, so there I'm using a couple of the extensions that I'm really familiar with. Like I'm really familiar with that sound of that dominant 7th. I'm trying to use that dominant 7th to get up to my 4 chord. Inside of my 4 chord, I'm using chromatics into like the 3rd. So that's going between chromatic to the 3rd. And then 5 to 6. It's kind of pentatonic in a way. Like, you know, I'm allowed to use pentatonic notes at pretty much any time. I'm very familiar with those sounds. And then use things that are outside that to kind of give me more tension, give me a reason to go somewhere. So it builds pretty naturally from playing your chord tones. You know, so you don't have to do something as kind of as simple as all of this. You could do things that are bigger. So one that I was playing around with this week was doing E minor, A minor, G to a D, kind of like a pop chord progression. And honestly, a really good exercise would be to see how far you can kind of stretch those ideas. You know. What am I and see just how much of the neck can you cover. Um, the trick with that kind of thing is you're always thinking about the next chord, right? Um, always thinking about the next chord, and then you want to find a note that kind of makes sense from the one you're on. Which is where that ear thing comes in. Even if you've forgotten what the chord is, and that will happen a lot because you'll get, especially when you're trying to cover 3 octaves or whatever, like as far as you can on the neck on a single chord. Quite often I find my brain gets soaked up in, okay, I'm doing E minor. Okay, all those notes are E minor. What chord am I going to now? And it's like,
you change.
yeah, and it's like, okay, but I can hear it in my head. Nah, yeah, so da da da, right? Like my ear knows it. Sometimes I freeze it putting a label on it. And the trick with that kind of stuff, and the thing you want to focus more on, is as you're playing a chord, you actually want to be thinking about your next chord.
Do you want to be thinking about also that obviously the notes in the next chord as well? So like if it's an F, you'd be like, oh yeah, there you go, your F, A, D or something. You know what I mean?
I don't, to be honest. I think A minor, and I know, right? Like, I know the notes of A minor all over the neck, and I'm not constantly thinking about the note letter. I would think more often about their position, so I might think about third or I might think about fifth. But what I'm aiming more towards in my personal playing is to hear that note and to go to it. And I know it's going to be a note, one, certainly at the moment with how far I'm along with thinking in triads, it's going to be a note close to where I am. And two, it's certainly going to be one of the notes near where I am, one of the notes from one of these inversion shapes, one of these arpeggios, close to where my fingers are at. A good place to start might be to do this, just the one chord progression, right, but in a narrow range. Right? And because you've got 4 chords, because the chords tell a bit of a story, I find that stuff much easier to latch onto. Like when I started taking a look at triads, the advice I give to everyone, and the advice everyone always gives is, start on 1 to 4, start on 1 to 5. And it actually took me a couple of months of work before I could even make that work at all, because it's kind of like that. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of a story going on.
Yeah, good point.
And it was a lot. I figured out, in the first couple of weeks, it's like, actually, no, I found this a lot easier when the chords themselves tell me something, tell me a bit of a story. So one of the ones I hooked onto was the start of the one we talked about, the Nina Seville or Misty, because they have the same chord progression. Doing 2-5-1, right? And I do the 2 minor 9, la, la, da, and then 1. And I was like, okay, well, there's some notes in there that kind of jump out to me and already sound cool. And they already kind of speak the chord progression to me. So if I use those, right, like I'm targeting these tones that I'm like, those tones already speak a story to me. So as long as I'm sitting around this area and hitting those tones at the right times, I'm connecting myself to those chords. And it can be like crazy repetitive stuff. Like I think, what I started with is probably going. Right? Because there's this chromatic line. And there's this note which sounds quite cool against all of the chords. It's the 9 on the B, it's the 6 on the E, and then it's the 3rd on the A. And that's the start of how I started figuring this stuff out. Like I've had this question for years, which is like, how to jazz? And I've learned tons of jazz songs. I've learned tons of jazz lines, and they would just never really come out in my playing. Um, and I was following all the advice of what people were telling you. Yep, study lots of jazz solos. And it's like, what I found I needed to do was to hear the line. The reason it wasn't coming out when I was playing things is because no matter how many of these things I learned, I never was really hearing them in my head. So what I needed to do was take the language of jazz, which is extensions, which is particular chord progressions, and turn it into something that when I hear that, I hear the extensions. I hear some kind of melody in it, which was difficult for me because coming from this kind of blues rock background, you get tied into patterns, where you're not like you're listening, but you're not really listening, and you can hear it a lot, especially in like the modern metal scene, where it's like people are playing things which are technically cool against those chords, but I don't think anyone symphonic would ever write that line. So by having a look at chord progressions, I'm like, okay, that's got a bit of a story. How do I kind of build on that? So like I think last time we talked a little bit about that minor line cliche, did we? That's a killer one, right? Because the melody's already there. And it's like, all I need to do to tie myself into that is improvise around that, always hitting that note on time. Which is a killer exercise to do. And you can do that with any chord progression. You're like, what's the bit that jumps out to me? And use that as my structure. Now, a formulaic way of practicing, like a jazz player might say, target your thirds and sevenths. So you take a chord progression, right, 1, 6, 2, 5. And your thirds and your sevenths are the most important ones. So like, that's like, they kind of already sound cool. So in order to turn that into a melody, we just need to connect them. So, right, like, and most of the time there, it's chord tones, right? Like it's just I'm using the thirds and the sevenths, and I'm thinking of my C major scale. So every time I'm changing chords, I'm thinking of those chord tones and connecting them via the C major scale. Right? So I think the best thing you could do for your practice is start with some chord progressions you think already sound cool. Something that is hopefully diatonic would be probably good. Although one of the things I latched onto really early was one major to 4 minor. So I was going E to A minor. 2 reasons. One, it's really distinctive, that change. Right, like that change is pretty distinctive, more so than say 1 to 4 in major. because it's dissonant, I think there's more of a story.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy for my ear to latch onto this, and then essentially, like, I started with doing arpeggios. All right, nearest note to here to go to an A. Right, like, again, it's one of those things where you could stop on the last note you played on that chord. And you're like, here's the change. I hear this note. Where is this note?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and just working on those arpeggio changes, right? Like, and that was literally just the arpeggio notes. I'm not even worrying about anything else. And the thing that really surprised me was going from, the 101 advice, use your arpeggios to improvise, and I could never do that. Someone's like, here's an A chord, and use your arpeggios, and I'd be like, but it sounds like.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, that doesn't. I can't even see how that then moves into something that I might like. And then suddenly, if it's like, oh, actually, if we do two chords, if there's a story going on, it makes a hell of a lot more sense. And really, all we're doing with all of these exercises, and you need to just come up with tons and tons and tons of chord progressions that you work on, constantly pushing yourself with how far you can take these ideas. Really, all we're doing is learning the neck.
Yeah.
Like, we're learning all of these different locations, and we're putting pressure on ourselves to go, where are these two chords? So quite often, I think some cool ones are ones that break the key in a little way because they're really orally distinctive. What was the one I was working on? Like, I was doing like. So, like, little tiny key break, A minor on G to a D on F sharp. Right, F sharp is not in the key. And then we get F.
In my opinion, I'll write them down just so I'll do them.
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is just the ones that I found interesting. You don't have to choose these ones. A minor on G, which you could think about as a C chord, and then D on F sharp. So, announcing F sharp, which is out of the key of C, then F, E7. All right, and the interesting thing here, if you think about the chord progression, like, A minor to A minor on G, we could think of that A minor and G as a C chord or a G chord. That's fine. Both of them are in the key of C. Then we get a D chord. D major is borrowing from A major. It's modal interchange. That F sharp is very, very distinctive. And then straight after the F sharp, I do like the 70s pop song thing of playing the F afterwards. So it's like, oh, now I got to hit this F note wherever I am. And then I go to E7. Well, E7 is only in the key of A harmonic minor. It's not in the key of A minor. Right? So we've got lots of places here where there are important accidentals that I think tell more of a story. We might start on A. Back to A, right? Inherently, just playing those notes, it's like, actually, that sounded kind of cool. Like, that sent me on a little bit of a journey, just playing those arpeggio notes. And then just take them all over the neck. So what I would suggest you do, take a position, do it all there. A on G, to a D, F, E7. Right? Then we might do it here. Right? So we move up the neck. What's the next one? D. Then you might do it, say, up here, A. done it in a few different places and you're starting to get a feel for how this chord progression rolls, I would also not change as quickly as I am. Like I'm just kind of doing the examples, right?
No,
One cool thing to do when you're playing around is don't necessarily give yourself a rhythm when you start out. You know, play on that chord until you feel the change happen, until you make it happen here first. You know, if you hear that change, then you're, I can hear that change, so where have I got to go from here? Then I would say, make your ideas wider. So when we do A, now I'm going to go to F. Sorry, A on G, so F, A, right? Try to spread it out so you're covering 2 positions on each of these. All right, and then see how far you can push that concept of, well, can I do like A? Now we need on G, so we're going to actually play a G arpeggio here. Then D, F, E, oops, E major. Would be good. I like see just how much of the neck you can cover with these things. Because what we're doing there is, obviously we're not going to play that all the time, but we're just trying to expand how we're thinking about the neck. We're trying to, by separating them further and further and further apart, these ideas become kind of more disparate, harder to follow. And like at the end goal here is that we don't want to just be comfortable in one place. We want to have the opportunity to have a vocabulary that might extend that far. You know, it's a really dramatic thing to have these big, like, you know, classical music will do that all the time in a build, where you might cover 2 octaves as this arpeggio. You know, from there you can then start going, okay, well, what are some of the melodic concepts I can think of? Pedal point, maybe. Can I do something cool with like pedal point with this whole thing? I don't know. Let's find out. So like. So like constantly hitting that A, pedaling an A. Thinking about doing it all from like a bass pedal too. Like,
what would you do then if like the A isn't in the next chord, or like it's dissonant in the chord, but you still want to try and keep a pedal point? Would you go to like something that relates to A, like one of the chord tones of A, or?
Yeah, it's not. There's no hard and fast rule here, right?
Cool.
Like, sometimes in keeping the dissonance there sounds really cool because it clashes against the chord, but it's established as a pattern. And if we've established it as a pattern, it's okay. Think about the solo in "My Guitar Gently Weeps" for the Beatles. Bang, ba, bang, ba, 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 bang. And he pedals that at the end of the song throughout all of the chords, and some of the chords it clashes more than it does on others. But what makes it cool is the way that the harmony makes the flavor of that note change.
Yeah.
You'll hear it a lot in Bach where he's doing pedal point stuff. Sometimes the note clashes. However, at other times, you could go for a more consonant thing and maybe you change the pedal. So you might have 2 notes that pedal across one half of the progression and the other half of the progression.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You know, in a modern sense, Coldplay does this kind of stuff a lot. Bands like Coldplay, where they do like really, really textured and layered kind of production, they do a kind of pedal point, which is I'm going to play these like 4 notes over and over and over again against all of the chords, and they're going to all be extensions on all of the chords.
Is that like clocks? Does clocks do that? That's kind of the only Coldplay song I know.
Yeah, I think so. I'd have to fire it up and listen to it to be sure. Yeah, almost in clocks. Yeah. But sometimes you can find like 3 notes where it's like, I'm going to do those 3 chords, and it's like, I might do like, in many ways, they almost feel like random notes because none of them, well, usually one or two of them make sense to each chord, but two of them definitely don't. So what makes that kind of sound cool, that kind of pedal point sound, is the way that you get different clashes, and the clash happens at different points in the line.
Mm.
You know, at different points it ties in and kind of moves in and around.
I got you.
That's kind of like pedal pointing ideas. It's a little further on from the kind of thing we're discussing. So what I would suggest you start with, so the sheet that I sent out last week, which is the same as the one this week.
Yes.
All right. I would start with taking a look at all of those progressions and finding if there's one that you think kind of sounds cool or one you can kind of hear a melody in to begin with. Then start with kind of arpeggio notes. You can either give yourself a free time things. I would suggest you kind of, the E minor to A minor thing, I would do that in free time. You know, it's kind of like where you feel like there's a natural, nice cadence to bump you up to that A. That's when you go to it. With these other ones, you might say, pick on one, like 50s Revival is kind of cool. And like, try it in one position.
Yep.
Stop in between chords. And the idea is wherever that chord change is about to happen, you want to hear the note that you are near. And you will be near one of them.
Yeah, for sure.
And focus in on that. And the more you practice that, the easier and easier and easier it will be to come up with more and more melodic lines. To push yourself out of that, what you need to do is push yourself in a direction, right? Like, if you play any one of these chord progressions a few times, you'll kind of you'll find flavors that you like a lot, and you'll just keep going back to that kind of thing. So you've got to say, okay, well, like if we took the chromatic line thing from the minor fall, right? So yeah, I think every time I've demonstrated this, I've started with it. Right, so I'm not allowed to use that now. I got to do something else. Right, like one of the ways of pushing yourself out of that might be to climb the neck instead. Okay, here's a cool one. Right, like, so it's kind of like that pedal pointing idea. I've moved my my chromatic line into a totally different register, and as soon as I played, I'm like, that just sounds pretty and cool, like. And all I'm doing there is applying the two ends of a C minor arpeggio, right? Like, that's a C minor arpeggio. So I'm just moving the bass note. Well, funny to say bass when I'm in this register, but like the lowest note here, doing the chromatic line. cool triplet feel, right? Makes me feel ungrounded in time. So to play on that idea, that's an idea I like. Okay, I need to move around a little bit more. So now I'm just adding in, the modal notes of C Aeolian, and maybe a blue note too, because stylistically that sounds pretty cool. Whilst I'm following this chromatic line, based around this arpeggio sound that I thought already sounded cool. Which is kind of how you start developing an idea. Like you come up with one thing, like, oh, actually that kind of works. I kind of like that. Let's try some of the notes around that as I'm playing. What does that do? So when I played, all right, if I play one note higher, it's like, oh, that's some tension. That really makes that whole thing lift slightly. Sorry, I'll do it in the register. Yep. So you just do a C minor arpeggio, and I come up to the flat six, and the flat six is very, very, very more spicy,
Yeah.
But that's cool, right? Like one of the problems I suppose with this is that in some ways, other than sounding cool, it also kind of sounds bland. So by adding some tension, and dwelling on that tension, like using that tension to kind of make the line more interesting. That was cool. Sounds. It's kind of like almost like a Phrygian dominant thing.
Yeah. But yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you.
So what I suggest everyone does is you turn this into your practice. This is your training, where you play with harmony, you play with chords. The more of it you can do unaccompanied, and the more of it you can track the chords in your head and track the changes, the better at these things you'll get. And these might not be the lines you end up using when you jam with someone, but when you jam with someone, you'll then have this kind of, oh, it's all right, I don't have to freak out so much about where do I find this note. It will start happening. And the better you get at it, the more you can play around with style, the more you can play around with genre. Initially I wouldn't give two shits about style and genre. I would just be like, does it sound like music? Which is why, like, some of the exercises, I don't know, do you remember I gave you that exercise on just the 1 chord and the 5 chord?
Yeah.
In minor, yeah? And it sounds kind of classical. It's like, yeah, great, lean on that. If you can make it sound like a kind of music, then just go with that. Because all we're looking for are these resolutions in these places and trying to connect our ear to the fretboard. And on to one of your earlier points, one of your earlier questions, that's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily constantly think of the notes. Yeah. I can always tell you what the note is, but it's not first thing in my mind. The first thing in my mind is the sound. And to me, and this goes against some of the university style education, I don't really give a crap about whether or not I can tell you what note it is. Like, it's very useful when I'm trying to orchestrate something.
Communicate.
Yeah. Although, you know, most of the improvisers I know, and I'm very heavily an improviser as a player. Like that's where I like to push people towards, because I think improvisation and composition are essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just one you haven't, you know, you got to do it now.
I like it. I like it.
And I think that's where musicians should head. One thing I know about, because I've worked with a lot of older musicians, and the ones who keep playing into their late periods or keep finding more joy in music are people who write. They either improvise or they write. The people who try to just reproduce music, they end up losing interest. You know, they hit a certain point and they're like, well, now it's boring. And it's like, I'm not surprised you find this boring. You know, like, you've been doing this since you were, like, for my parents, because both of my parents have kind of lost interest in music after they stopped doing it professionally. They still listen, they still pick up an instrument occasionally, but they kind of ran out of steam. And my mum was a performer from the age of 7.
Oh damn.
You know, and like she was back in the 50s, she was on those talent shows and she was on TV and stuff. And the difference in her mentality was, oh, it's work. You know, like I learn these things and I perform them.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's been a huge limitation for her in terms of staying connected with an instrument. She's always been the kind of person that said, I can't improvise. Like you know, like improvisation is not a skill. It's this kind of thing that you either inherently have or don't have.
Yeah.
Which I think is unfortunately too common and like a really dangerous idea to put around into people's minds, because it's like improvisation is literally just saying, I know the notes that I'm playing and I could play some different ones. So if you know your instrument well enough, it should be something which just kind of happens. Like you see a chord chart that says E minor. Do you play this, this? Like,
Yeah, it's up to you. You
yeah,
improvise.
it's up to you. Yeah, it's up to you. You just kind of, you come up with a path. And I think for bass players, thinking of them as paths is a great way of being. You know, like, so you know, another option for you would be to say play a bass line once over say 3 chord changes, and then make sure it's different the next time. You know, so don't allow yourself to come back to the route that you started on. Go somewhere else.
Okay.
You know, so like if we're doing that CFG thing, like C, G. Instead of coming back to C, I'm going to E now. C, F, G, C. Okay, I've got to come back down. C, F, G, C. That's like every time I played that, it's been a different path across the instrument. And yeah, some of the things were similar, but the point is that I'm kind of freely moving around the neck, constantly doing these chord cycles. And cooler bass lines quite often do that kind of thing. And you might not do it every cycle, you know, like obviously if you do that on every song you do, everything's going to sound very complicated. And we don't always want everything to sound complicated. There's always still room for, but I tell you what, if you're ever playing with a guitarist who's doing some kind of improvisation and you start walking with him, like you either choose intentionally to, when he goes up, you go down, or when he goes down, or you move together.
Yep.
Cool stuff will happen.
Especially when you got a drummer as well who hears it and listens as well.
Yeah, like you guys start playing triplets, so he does.
Yeah, be pretty.
You know, and that's where I think music is the most fun. Some of the most fun I've ever had was playing with another really good musician, where you both taking turns at a solo, and you're like, okay, we both do solo now, and like, and you both start playing because you're all playing chord tones. You don't actually need the chords in there anymore. So then it becomes this interesting interplay between like, well, I'm going up and you're going down, and I play this thing and you play that thing, and it becomes really responsive.
Fair enough.
And it's super cool. It is a super cool place to be, and that's where I think people start actually playing with music. It also comes back to like every time you're doing a cover of something, right? Like once you have those skills, you can be like, well, I want this verse to feel different. This is the verse where it all gets tender, so I've got to do something different. So maybe instead of rooting everything on the root, I root on the fifth because fifths sound inherently warm. Right, compared to, which suddenly sounds really bright, with that D in the bass. And it's the kind of stuff you find out by, taking a Cutler song and playing the bass line four ways. And in those four ways, two of them probably be things like, you're like, yeah, they're fine. I could see how I might do that live, but they're not going to like shake my world. And like one of them might be like, oh, actually, that did something really cool to the music.
I get you.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, because I guess in that regards, like when you, let's say, for example, in songwriting or something, if I get sent a track, I can just, play over it a few times until I improvise something that just fits the piece, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, that's definitely the session man thing to do. Look, in the Nashville session scene, you probably only got about 5 seconds to do it. So they expect you to listen to it once and hear it. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay, now I've got an idea. I'm going to do this idea. But where you start with that stuff is exactly what we're talking about. Like, oh, yeah, give me the loop. Let me play like 6 or 7 different passes. And each pass, I go, I've got to do something different. What happens if I start on the 5th? What happens if I start on the 3rd? And it's through finding all of those different paths across the neck that one of them will be like, wow, that was a cool thing. This way that I went up and the singer went up at the same time, or the way I went down and the singer went up. It's like that really created this cool space. How do I then build the rest of my line around this idea?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, so hopefully that helps with some of this composition stuff you've been doing. It's the same on all instruments, right?
Exactly.
Like, it's exactly the same idea. So you can kind of improvise the lines on a bass and then go, hey, wait a minute, let's throw it up an octave and put it into here. I suppose the next step above just using your arpeggio tones would be to use your diatonic notes around the arpeggio. So like we've got a G minor, so I might. And it's like you could hear that whole time that line I was playing, la dum da dum da da dum da, like still sounds like G minor, right? And it's because I'm using these 2 notes of G minor as my framework, and I'm going da 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 da.
Just a question off that, because it's something that I've always been aware of, but I'm not too sure what's going on. This is sort of in the jazz world where they start playing, like where they might chuck like a Locrian chord, scale, or like an altered scale over a certain other chord. I know it's probably much more ahead of where I am now, but
okay, so you remember at the start of this term, I have to be real quick because we're actually over time in the next lesson. At the start of this term, I said you're going to define chords in 3 ways. We're going to have major chords, minor chords, and dominant chords.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you're going to do a cool scale, altered scales, I'd put them all on a dominant chord.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
All right. If you're going to use, like, if it's a major chord, we're probably using major, or we might be using Lydian, right? Lydian is a cool major sound.
Yes.
All right. So an example of that, here's C, right? And we go to the 5. So C. Right, so that's essentially using over the G. I'm turning the G into a G altered, which is sharp 5, flat 9. All right. So quite often, one of the things that you would have heard me do is that when I hit that 5 chord, all right, which is that's a flat 9. I love flat 9 sounds on dominant chords, especially in minor. Right. So and flat 9 is sharp 1, right? So like I'm doing my G7 arpeggio with a sharp 1. And that creates a whole bunch of tension that sounds great when it goes away to resolve back to the 1 minor. All right? So that's why if you go back to that list a couple of lessons ago where I was like, when you see dominant chord, try these extensions.
Yes.
That's where those funky scales come from, right?
Okay.
So that's definitely something to take a look at. I would be more than happy to meet up in, next week or something, or a couple of days if you want, and have a more deep chat about it. It's just I've got to run to my next class.
Yeah, no, you're right. You head off because I've got to go somewhere as well soon. So yeah, no, it makes sense. Thank you so much.
No worries, man. So yeah, honestly, if you want to have more of a chat, when you had a couple, like look at this stuff for a couple of days and then meet back, I'd be more than happy to. Just send me a text.
Yeah, we'll do. No worries. Thank you.
Awesome, Chris. Catch you later.
Have a good one.
You too.